All right. Welcome, everyone, and welcome back if you've been to one of our webinars before. My name is Keith Spencer, and I'm one of our career experts here at FlexJobs, and I'm glad you could join us for today's webinar. While we're giving everyone a minute to get in and get settled, please feel free to share where you're joining us from today in the chat section. Before we dive into our presentation, I am going to cover a few housekeeping items. You are more than welcome to take notes during the webinar if you would like, but this webinar is being recorded and a link to the video as well as any resources we discuss will be sent out to you within a week to the email address that you used to register for today's event. Please note that this presentation has been pre-recorded, but the Q&A portion that will follow the presentation is going to be conducted live with one of our career experts. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A section of Big Marker rather than the chat section. This really helps us keep track of questions in one place, and the Q&A section also allows you to click a thumbs up on someone else's question that you might also like to hear the answer to so that we can see which questions are the most popular. We probably won't be able to get to everyone's question today, but we can almost guarantee that you will learn something helpful. All right, let's go ahead and get started with today's webinar, which is titled How to Answer the Most Common Job Interview Questions. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering. First, I'll share some general tips and best practices that you can follow when preparing for any job interview. Then we'll examine some of the reasons why employers ask certain types of questions and what they're hoping to learn about you by asking those questions. Next, we'll go over a dozen or so of the most common interview questions that you're likely to encounter, and then we'll share some sample answers to some of those questions so you can get an idea of what an effective response might look like. Lastly, before we move on to our live audience Q&A, we will discuss the importance of developing questions to ask your interviewer and share some sample questions for you to consider. And then finally, we will close out our webinar with our live audience Q&A so that you have a chance to ask your questions directly with one of our career experts. Okay, so let's begin by going over some general advice and best practices for effective interview preparation. So one of the first aspects of effective interview preparation is actually something that you should begin before you even apply to the job, which is research the company. And then, of course, as you prepare for your interview, it's a good idea to do some additional research to kind of refresh your memory. And you want to make sure that you have a strong understanding of things like, what the company does, the products or services they offer, who their customers are, any recent news or new initiatives, and other details of that nature. Doing this type of research can help you answer questions in a more relevant and impactful way because there is a contextual base for your responses. And it'll also showcase the fact that you've done your homework, which is something that employers tend to appreciate. The next best practice is another one that likely should begin before you submit your application, which is carefully analyzing the job description. You really want to have a solid understanding of what the role entails and what the needs and priorities of the company are so that you can present your skills, experience, and accomplishments in a relevant way, highlighting your strong fit for the position. I often kind of phrase this as, thinking about your audience. The job description, along with your company research, can help you understand what's important to your audience so that you can focus the discussion during the interview on the things that they are most interested in. It's almost like studying for the test, but the job description is your cheat sheet. The employer is literally giving you the answers to the test and they want you to use them. So paying careful attention to job descriptions is very important. Once you have researched the company and you have a comprehensive understanding of the job description, you can then begin preparing relevant stories and examples that you want to share during your interview. You want to make sure that you are, essentially showing rather than just telling. So sharing tangible examples from your past to support your responses to interview questions is a smart plan because it can more clearly illustrate your abilities and experiences. Essentially you want to provide, evidence to back up your claim that you are a good fit for the role. So for example, if they ask you about your greatest strength and you maybe consider problem solving to be that strength, you'd want to actually give them some real life examples of how you have solved problems in the past, how you have implemented innovative solutions to complex issues to illustrate your problem solving skills. Or if they ask how you might handle a specific situation, you'd want to describe your intended approach and then give an example or tell a story of how you've navigated a similar situation in the past. So, preparing a variety of relevant stories and examples ahead of time, again, based on your company research and analysis of the job description, that's going to help you make sure that you have, worthwhile topics to discuss throughout the entirety of the interview, while also highlighting your fit for the role. And then the last best practice on this slide is practice. You don't always know what questions you're going to be asked in an interview. So it isn't necessarily helpful to, script and rehearse and practice your answers to specific questions, but it can be, fairly easy to determine what types of topics will come up if you consider common interview questions, research the company, and analyze the job description. So you'll be able to practice talking about these topics and your history with them, as well as practicing, telling your stories and your examples. You can practice in front of a mirror. You can record yourself on your phone or your computer so you can then watch the recording and assess your performance. Or you can even conduct a mock interview with a friend, a family member, or a coach. All of those strategies can be incredibly helpful in preparing for your interview. And a couple other considerations to keep in mind are preparing questions to ask them, which we will talk about later in this presentation, preparing your interview attire so that you look professional and can make a good first impression, and preparing your interview space in your home if it's a remote interview, or mapping out your travel route if it's an in-person interview. But it's really important, particularly in a competitive job market, to remember that, winging it is not an effective interview strategy, because like most things in life, preparation and practice are the keys to interview success. Okay, so before we take a look at some of the most common interview questions, let's briefly talk about why certain questions are asked. So there are a number of different categories of job interview questions. There are, behavioral questions, situational, technical, analytical or case study questions, competency-based questions, questions related to company culture, background or experience-based questions, curveball questions, and even brain teaser questions. And the various reasons behind asking those different types of questions are what you see here outlined on this slide. And the first reason that certain questions are asked is because employers want to gauge your interest in both the position and the company. Ideally, employers are looking to hire people who have a strong interest in or passion for the type of work that they need you to do, because they want you to remain engaged and in your work and continually, striving to perform your role successfully. And similarly, they want to know if you have a specific or genuine interest in their organization as a whole, because they're hoping to find employees who will be, fulfilled by their work and want to stay at the organization for a longer period of time, because, high rates of turnover can be very costly for a company. The next reason behind some of these questions is probably the most obvious reason, which is having the ability to analyze your ability to perform the actual role that they are trying to fill. So, technical questions, case study questions, competency questions, and situational questions are often asked specifically to try to assess whether or not you can be successful in performing the tasks that they need you to perform and achieving the results that they would want you to achieve. Next is trying to understand your fit for the company or the team. This basically means that they are trying to gauge if your personality and your work style will align with others on your team or within the company, as well as whether or not you can work well with their clients or customer base. At the very least, they want to know that you're not the type of person that will sort of create a lot of conflict or maybe hinder productivity or efficiency. And then, similar to analyzing your ability to perform the role, they want to be able to assess your knowledge of your role, your field, or your industry. People who are knowledgeable about their role, field, and industry, including things like, staying up to date on best practices, new trends, and emerging technologies, they tend to also be high performers, which is obviously something that most companies would want. Companies will also ask analytical, curveball, or brain teaser questions because they want to determine your problem solving skills. Lots of roles require a healthy amount of problem solving because, there's a certain amount of ambiguity and change involved in the workplace. So knowing if you can adapt to change and solve unexpected problems that might arise is definitely an important consideration in the hiring process. Along those same lines, the workplace can be incredibly stressful, so some questions are asked for the explicit purpose of seeing how you can handle stressful situations. Certain questions that put you on the spot, maybe force you to think of an answer quickly off the top of your head and remain calm under pressure, they can, at least theoretically, give employers an idea of whether or not you can handle stress in an effective manner without losing your cool. And they can also, reveal a little bit of your thought process, which is also important to employers. And I know that, a lot of people really dislike some of these, most common interview questions that we're about to go over. But considering the reasoning behind these questions, I feel can help you improve your ability to, answer in an effective way, and make it a lot easier to kind of navigate these types of questions in future interviews because you understand what it is that they're looking for in a potential response. Okay, so on the next few slides, I have a dozen or so of the most common job interview questions outlined. So let's now take a look at those. So first we have the obvious questions, which I would be willing to guess a majority of us in this webinar today have encountered these in previous job interviews. And one of the most dreaded job interview questions is, can you tell me about yourself? And I will give you a specific sample response to this question later on. But this question, it confuses a lot of people because it can be hard to figure out what you should actually share about yourself. So for this question, you want to be careful to not just, sort of reiterate everything that's listed on your resume or talk about things that are overly personal in nature. What you want to do is provide a concise professional summary of your relevant experience, skills, and accomplishments that align with the role that you are interviewing for. And of course, what will be relevant should be based on your company research and your analysis of the job description. So you can start your response to this question with sort of a brief overview of your career path and then highlight, key accomplishments or skills that are necessary and relevant for the position. And then close out your response by kind of connecting your experience and your professional interest to the company's needs and their mission. You're tailoring your response to show the value that you can provide and your genuine interest in this specific organization is going to help give the interviewer a clear sense of why you're a strong candidate. Next, we have what is your greatest strength and what is your greatest weakness. I kind of combined these two into one. And these questions, they can give employers an idea of your fit for the role, maybe your fit for the team, or even an understanding of your level of self-awareness, which is an important attribute to have in really any workplace. So for greatest strength, you want to aim to give a strength that aligns with the position. So again, analyze that job description carefully, but then also try to back up your strength or support your strength with an example of how you've leveraged that strength to achieve positive outcomes in the past. So, I gave that problem solving example earlier, but for another example, let's say that, communication is your greatest strength. You wouldn't want to just state, oh, I'm a great communicator. You would also want to then give them an example of how you've successfully communicated in the past to do things like, solve problems, accomplish challenging tasks, or achieve important results. And then for your greatest weakness, you do want to be honest and share an actual weakness, but make sure that you aren't mentioning a weakness that could potentially disqualify you from the role. And then, with your weakness, make sure to explain how you are working on improving that weakness, maybe ways that you've learned to potentially compensate for that weakness or any lessons you might have learned from experiencing that weakness. Anytime that a question is focused on a negative, like a weakness, make sure that you are kind of flipping things around and ending your answer on a positive note. Then we have, why do you want to work here? For this question, avoid focusing on the benefits to yourself and instead focus on what it is that you like about that role and about that company. Basically the things that attracted you to apply for that job. Is there something that the role or something about the role that you're really passionate about or skilled in? Is there something that the company does really well that makes you want to join their team? Or is there something about the company's mission, values, or product or service offerings that you really like or appreciate? Those are all the types of things that you'd want to emphasize because they can show your interest in and fit for the role. And then lastly, where do you see yourself in 5 years? For this type of question, as well as any questions really that focus on sort of career goals or long-term plans, you want to make sure that you're finding a balance between your ambition and your potential fit within the organization or room for growth within the organization. And you also want to show that you understand that, the future is uncertain and you aren't someone who is overly rigid or inflexible in their plans. So giving a response that shows that you want to learn and grow and gain and apply new skills and that you're realistic about your career trajectory, that can inspire confidence that you could be a solid contributor to their team who will potentially stay and grow with that company. Okay, here are a few more questions that you could potentially encounter. So let's break these down now. We'll start with, why are you looking for a new role? For this one, be careful to not go negative about your current or past position or employer. Instead instead of focusing on the past, you want to try to focus on the future. What is it about this specific position or company that attracts you or interests you? What about this position is so appealing that it would make you want to leave your current role? Try to show your excitement and your enthusiasm when responding to this question. And the same can be said about why did you leave your last position or why are you leaving your current job? You don't want to seem like the type of person that is going to, badmouth people or badmouth organizations. So try to focus on the future. What are you moving towards rather than what are you attempting to move away from? And for both, what is your proudest accomplishment and what motivates you? Try to focus on something that will be relevant to this specific job. So again, make sure that you've analyzed the job description carefully. Is there an accomplishment from your past that aligns nicely with this potential future role that you could emphasize to help show your fit? Is there an aspect of this role that you find highly motivating that you can mention in order to show that you'd be enthusiastic about the job? These types of responses will help you further emphasize how your interests, your values, skills, abilities, and experiences are all aligned with this role and with this organization, helping you further emphasize how you could be a good addition to the team. Okay, so now let's finish up this section by looking at some common behavioral questions that often come up in job interviews. And questions that are behavioral or situational in nature lend themselves really well to what we discussed earlier about using stories and examples from your past to bolster your responses to interview questions. You should try to do that, share stories and examples with as many questions as is feasible, but it's particularly applicable and important with these types of questions. These questions typically ask about specific scenarios that you've likely encountered in the past, but you may occasionally be asked about situations that you've never actually encountered or experienced. And, because of that, that means, preparation is even more crucial because You want to research the company and analyze the job description to learn about what some of those potential things that might be discussed or asked about, so you can be prepared to respond with what you would do in that type of situation if you've never actually encountered it before in your past. So preparing ahead of time, you can be ready to kind of discuss those types of hypotheticals, so to speak. And these kinds of questions are pretty straightforward, so I won't go over each one like I did on the previous slides, but I do want to mention a couple important points about responding to behavioral or situational questions. So if you are asked about something that could potentially be negative, like we talked about, with your weakness, maybe you're asked about a failure, a conflict, or a disagreement, or maybe like an upset customer, things like that. You want to be sure to kind of flip things around into a positive at the end of your response to, show what you learned or maybe how you fixed the problem or how you would do things differently in the future. Everyone makes mistakes, everyone has negative experiences, but showing how you use those experiences as a learning tool is really important. And also, if you're asked about a situation where you did something directly connected to the role for which you are interviewing, make sure that you emphasize the results that you achieved or the positive impact that you had on your team or your company or other stakeholders that might have been involved. That's important because employers care about your impact, not just the things that you did. They want to know, what were the results? How did you make things happen for the organization? How did you improve things? Those are the types of things that they're going to care about the most. Okay, so now that we've discussed the reasons employers ask certain questions and gone over some examples of the most common interview questions, it's now time to look at some sample responses that you could potentially give to a few of those common questions. So depending on what type of screen you are watching this on, the text might be pretty small. So I'll read the examples on each slide out loud. And this first sample response is for the question, can you tell me about yourself? And the sample response says, I started my career in healthcare administration where I developed a strong foundation in customer service, organization, and problem solving. Over time, I realized I wanted to pivot into marketing as I found myself drawn to creating communications and engaging audiences. To prepare, I've taken courses in digital marketing and content strategy, and I recently completed an internship where I helped grow a nonprofit social media following by 35%. I'm excited to bring my transferable skills and fresh perspective to this new field. So in this response, you can see how the person was bringing up skills and experiences that we can assume are relevant to the position they're interviewing for. And you can see that they're giving some justification for a career change that they seem to be trying to make. They also try to showcase their positive impact and wrap up the response by relating it back to the position at hand, making sure to mention how, their unique experience could be valuable to the employer. And obviously, everyone's response to this question will be different, but hopefully this is a solid example that can give you some ideas of how you might structure your own response. Now let's go ahead and watch a video from our career expert, Tony, to see how she might answer the question, why are you leaving your current job?
I'm currently at a point in my career where I want to take on new challenges and grow my skill set further. My current role has really been a great learning experience for me, but I am intrigued by the opportunity that this position provides to utilize my skill set just a little bit differently. I'm eager to expand my knowledge professionally, which is why I'm really excited about this opportunity.
All right, so like we talked about earlier, you can see that Tony avoided saying anything negative about her current role or employer, and instead focused on the positives that she was trying to move towards in her career, which is exactly what you want to do. Okay, so let me go ahead and read these responses now, or excuse me, this response now to the question, why are you interested in this role? So it says, I'm interested in this role because it offers me the chance to combine my marketing knowledge with my passion for helping others. I learned about the organization's mission and how it helps people improve their lives through education and financial literacy. I've watched the jobs pages for roles fitting my skill set, and I was delighted when this position was posted. I know I can be an asset to the team, and I'm excited about this role's potential opportunities. So, because this is just a sample response, it's probably a little more vague than you would actually want to be, but it does have some really good elements. They show that they've done their research into the organization, they explain their relevant professional passion that is related to the role, and they at least allude to the fact that their skill set aligns nicely with the role. In a real interview, it'd be a good idea to give an actual example or two of this alignment, but again, this is just a sample. Here is a sample response to the question, what motivates you? And it says, as a care advocate, I am passionate about helping patients navigate the complicated insurance and medical system. On a personal level, I've seen the devastating impact that occurs when patients postpone routine care. So I look forward to the ability to personally support others' health in positive ways. And I really like this example because it shows a clear connection between the person's motivations and the role. This person is a care advocate and they are motivated by helping people, which is exactly what their job entails. And they even go so far as to connect their personal passion to an aspect of their personal life without going, too in depth into their personal business, which can further convince the employer that their passion is indeed a genuine one. All right, let's watch one more video now that I recorded showing a sample response to the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? In 5 years, I expect to have grown both personally and professionally, building on the skills that I already bring to this role while embracing new challenges and learning new skills as well. I aim to stay adaptable, continuously learning through opportunities like training or mentorship programs so that I can find new ways to support others and produce high quality results. Whether it's mastering emerging technologies or contributing to strategic decision making, I want to remain a valuable and evolving member of my team. So I liked this response because I think a lot of people expect your answer to this kind of question to focus on an eventual leadership position, but not everyone wants to pursue a leadership role. So this response instead focuses on learning and growth and being able to continue to find ways to make a positive contribution to their team or their organization. So I thought that was a good sample response to include in this presentation. And then lastly, because it can be such a challenging question for so many people, here is a sample response for what is your greatest weakness? And this response says, I found it challenging to delegate tasks because I want to ensure everything is done correctly. Over time, I've realized that trusting my team and providing clear instructions are essential for success. I've started using check-ins and feedback loops to delegate more effectively, and it's helped me and my team perform better. And as you can see with this response, the person made sure to mention an honest but not too detrimental weakness, and then finished by explaining how they've been working on improving upon this weakness and the progress that they've made so far, avoiding ending their response on a negative note. Again, everyone has weaknesses, everyone makes mistakes, but what you learn from those weaknesses and mistakes, how you try to improve upon them, and the things that you do to mitigate the negative consequences of those weaknesses or those mistakes is what is really important. Okay, so before we end our webinar, let's talk about the importance of preparing questions to ask the employer in the interview and share some sample questions that could be good to ask. So in the same way that employers have different reasons behind the questions that they ask you during an interview, you also want to understand your own reasoning for the questions that you might ask them during the interview. So what I mean by this is think about your priorities. What are the most important things to you about a potential new job, and what questions can you ask that might help you learn information related to those priorities? So for example, my personal top priority is to fully understand the expectations of the person in the role and the primary challenges that they will likely face. After that, work-life balance is my next priority. So because of this, most of my questions center around those priorities, and I'll give you some actual examples of what those questions might look like on the next slide. But It's also important to be tactful in asking your questions because you want to convey that you're interested in understanding the role and the organization so you can be successful in the position rather than making it seem like you only care about the personal benefits of the job. So finding a balance and having that tact is very important. Okay, so now some sample questions, and each of these questions align with some of the priorities that we had on the previous slide. So the first one can help give insights into a company's culture because the way an organization recognizes and appreciates their personnel is an important aspect of their culture. That second question can provide insights into the leadership style of a team because the process that teams use to make decisions and determine their direction is typically dictated by team leadership and has a pretty significant impact on your day-to-day work. Excuse me. The third question, obviously, touches on work life balance. Now, do keep in mind that you not only want to listen to what they say when responding to your questions, but also how they act when responding. Can they easily provide some solid examples of supporting work life balance, or do they struggle to come up with any meaningful response? It's important to pay careful attention when asking your questions and listening to their response. Then we have a question that focuses on the expectations of the role. And this is personally a question that I love to ask during interviews because I'm the type of person who excels when I have clear expectations. So I want to know what those expectations might be before accepting a job offer. And then lastly, this final question focuses on challenges because it's helpful to know ahead of time the problems you could potentially be encountering and that you'll likely be expected to help overcome or solve. And just remember, regardless of what you ask, you want to aim to be tactful and ask questions in a way that can help further solidify your commitment to the role. Another quick tip that I'll give you is that you could copy the job description, on your phone or your computer, and then go to your AI tool of choice and use a prompt like, based on the following job description, what are 10 strategic questions that I can ask during an interview for this role? The AI tool is then going to give you some solid options that you could consider adding to your list of questions. All right, so before we dive into our audience Q&A, let's cover a few final action steps and reminders here that you can take going forward. So the first one is prepare thoroughly for interviews because you don't want to rely solely on your ability to kind of wing it or think of what to say off the top of your head. Next, research the company and carefully review job descriptions so that you know what type of information will be most relevant to your audience and can adjust your responses accordingly. Then consider how you might respond to some common questions. And remember to think about your audience when determining the type of stories and examples that you want to share about yourself as you respond to these questions. And then practice your responses and your storytelling skills so that you can gain some experience applying your interviewing skills and go into interviews with confidence and poise. As a reminder, a copy of the recording of this webinar, as well as any resources presented within the presentation, will be emailed out within the next week. Do be sure to check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered there. For even more tips, tricks, and resources, I recommend going to the FlexJobs blog. You'll see the URL there on the screen. It includes a vast amount of free articles, resources, webinars, and videos for members and non-members alike. Now let's go ahead and open up to your questions. Please remember to type them in the Q&A area rather than the chat section, and feel free to give a thumbs up to anyone else's question that you'd also like to hear answered so we know which questions are the most popular.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Let's go right into the questions. What is the best way to go about answering curveball questions? Well, these questions are designed for an employer to really see how you think on your feet. Sometimes, depending on the question, they might be trying to uncover some of your values. It really depends. But I think that it's important for everybody to understand that it's okay to take a moment before responding to kind of like collect your thoughts and to think through what you might say, because these questions are like surprising. Even though you might expect a curveball question, it could be anything from like, if you could be a tree, what kind of tree would you be, to what's your favorite cereal? And so it can be anything really. So just know that it's okay to take a second to think through what you want to say as your answer. If you need to ask an additional clarifying question, that's perfectly fine as well. I think that these questions have a tendency to maybe make us like panic or stress or get more nervous than we already are. But it's if you don't need to focus on giving a correct answer, right? It's just thinking through and giving a thoughtful answer based on the question you are given. So that's the way I would go about answering those questions as well. How do you answer questions about applying to a position that is at a lower role than your last position, like applying for program manager when your previous role was as director? Well, I think first what you need to do in your preparation is really determine why you're doing that and what you are most looking forward to in that role that is at a lower level than where you've been previously. Because there's likely a reason that you're doing that. Maybe it's because you don't want to manage people anymore. Maybe it's because you miss doing those individual contributor type tasks that were a part of what you used to do before you were in management. And from there, you can start to develop your answer, because you're certainly not going to say, well, I don't like managing people. I just want to do program manager work. That's not how you want to answer it, of course. And I think you all know that. But I would say, this role is really appealing to me because as a program manager, when I was a program manager, one of the things I really loved about it and thrived in an environment where I was able to do A, B, and C. And I'm really looking forward to rolling up my sleeves and getting back into that type of work again. And you can, leave it at that. Also, I would again concentrate on the job description and the key things that are required for the role, and how you have a skills match and the experience required to be able to execute on those, and tying it back to the role and focusing on that can be really beneficial in your answer to that question. What if you genuinely don't know the answer to a question? All right, so a couple thoughts on this question. First, I think preparation is key. And when you are preparing answers to, commonly asked interview questions, or you are preparing sort of your star situations like situation, task, action, and result to some of those questions, I think that those scenarios that you come up with can likely be used for more than one question, to answer more than one type of question. So the preparation piece is key. If you genuinely don't know an answer to a question, um, of course, every time you're asked a question, you can pause to try to collect yourself. You can ask a clarifying question, or you can say, do you mind if we come back to this question? I really want to, think a little bit longer about what example I can give or how I can answer this question. So do you mind if we come back to it? You can do that. Um, you could say, depending on what the question is, like this is all situational and it would depend on the question. Um, and if I'm thinking through the types of questions that are asked in an interview, you really should be able to answer them. It's not as if the question that you're getting is, what day of 1996 was this event, right? Something that has a exact answer. So I think if you really have some highlights thought through about your experience, the skills that you have, the successes that you've had, you would be able to weave an answer together, on a question. Now, this is different than if somebody asks you, "Tell me about a time when you had to manage a conflict on your team." And if you truly have never done that, I wouldn't say, "Well, I've never had to do that." What I would say is, you know, fortunately, my teams have been very cohesive and collaborative, and that issue has not presented itself. However, here's what I would do if this happened. And that way you can, kind of provide an answer there in a what if situation. Would you please provide do's and don'ts for the where do you see yourself in 5 years question? I always struggle with this answer since I'm not interested in becoming a manager or climbing the corporate ladder. Again, what I would do first in your preparation is really think about what do you want to be doing in 5 years? If you were in this role, what would you hope to be doing in 5 years? And, one of the things that you can say is, I really, am excited about this opportunity. I have a really strong skill set that matches and align it with the job posting again there and say something like, I want to, in 5 years, have become an expert or a subject matter expert in this role. And I want to continue to grow and contribute on the team to drive results for the organization. That's what I would say. What's the best way to answer why are you looking question when you've been downsized? I think honesty is the best policy here. What I would say is, my last role unfortunately ended with a company reorganization. So I was one of multiple people who was downsized, but it's given me an opportunity to really take stock of what I want in my next role. And that is why I'm so excited to be talking to you today. And here's what I would love with this opportunity. Do employers typically find it valuable if we mention examples of skills and results generated from entrepreneurial experience as opposed to only mentioning examples of skills and results produced from our traditional 9 to 5 experiences? I think what employers find valuable is if they can see you as a good fit in the role. And the way that you do that is providing illustrative examples of how you would do that based on answers to the question. So if some of it is based on entrepreneurial experience or volunteer experience or traditional 9 to 5 experience, I think that works. I've answered a question before that I didn't have any experience with in a paid position, but I had volunteer experience with. And so that is the situation I presented as an answer to that question. And it actually works really nicely. I think you have to think of yourself, the experiences that you've had holistically, particularly if you've owned your own business or you have some of those entrepreneurial experiences, as well as any volunteer, unpaid, pro bono work that you've done as well. Is it appropriate to bring a notebook for writing down those thoughts as you are answering questions? I sometimes take when I've been in interviews before, I have said, I is it okay if I take notes on any information you share about the role? So I think if you are upfront about that and ask, it's probably a okay. Let's see. Are these questions on a printout for us? We don't have them on a printout. You can go to the handouts. Here's a couple options for you. We have many resources, one of which is common interview questions and answers. So you can link to that. And we will also be sending you a recording so you can go back and look through the slides and pause those slides to see what the questions are. How should I approach questions that assume I have worked recently when I've been out of the workforce for an extended amount of time? Well, what I would do is if a career break is not on your resume, I would think about adding that to your resume. In the handout section, we have samples on how you can do that. And what I would do is really focus on, you don't have to explain why you've been out of the workforce. You might briefly say, I took an intentional pause. I'm excited and energized to return to work. And here's what excites me about this role. So basically, you don't need to focus on the break that you've taken. And instead, you want to focus on forward thinking and what's to come from you, in this role, should they choose to hire you. Um, Let's see. Can FlexJobs do a future webinar on some of the most challenging interview questions and how to answer them? That's a good thought. We'll add that to our ideas list. The challenge is with that is that challenging interview questions are different for everybody. But what I would do is, again, look at the resources and the common interview questions that are asked. We could talk about curveball interview questions. There's a number of different ways we could go. But if you can really get a handle on what you would say to answer the most commonly asked job interview questions, that's going to really help you throughout the whole interaction and getting your confidence and maintaining that all the way through. What's the best way to answer a question like this? What Muppet are you and why? Well, so this is a curveball question, right? So again, I would take a moment, collect your thoughts, focus on demonstrating your thought process. You could even say, well, it wouldn't be, um, Kermit because of this. It might be Fonzie because of this, or perhaps I would consider being this one, and this is why. And that's really going to give the employer somewhat of a view of your thought process. All right, last question because we are out of time. Thank you for this course. Well, you're welcome. I'm interested in how do you prepare and give solid answers when they don't give you the questions to read? Are you allowed to request the questions? Most companies won't give you the questions ahead of time, although I have read some articles lately that say that some companies are considering or have started giving some interview questions ahead of time. But what I would do is concentrate on looking at resources, using AI tools, using the FlexJobs website to figure out what the most commonly asked interview questions are so you can at least prepare those. 99.9% of the time, the first interview question you will get is tell me about yourself. You need to have a really great answer for that question. And then some of the other common questions that we covered today is a really great place to start as well. All right. Hopefully, this was helpful for everybody. We really appreciate seeing you in Big Marker and taking time to spend with us. We're looking forward to all of the things that we have planned in 2025, as this is our last webinar of 2024. So, happy holidays to all of you. And we will be back January 2nd. So, check out all of the webinars that we've got available for registration, and we will be back then. Thanks all. Bye-bye.